Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Differential. I, your host, Lorimer, who is a little bit sleep deprived, and I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing?
How's Nick? How are you?
Yeah, all right. The elections always mess up my sleep, so I'm a little bit over the place. I apologize to our listeners/viewers if I do anything odd or strange or say anything bizarre. We're, of course, also joined by Mr. Gabriel Crouse. For our viewers, you'll be able to see that he is indeed wearing his weirdest shirt. Gabriel, how are you?
Yeah, it's a weird election day, so I thought I'd wear kind of my most weird. It's very strange times.
I hope all Daily Friend listeners voted yesterday. We have been nagging you to do it for ever since we took the IEC to court. So we hope that you guys made good on that. But even if you haven't, it's fine. Just like the video, and we'll forgive you. With that said,
the thumbnail thing that you get if you voted, pretty cool. But giving the thumbs up on the video, even cooler.
Even better. So yeah, the election that just was. Now I will preface this by saying that we're recording this or broadcasting it live at about 1:30. So a lot of results are still coming in. They were, I think, a little bit slower than expected, despite, which is probably the biggest story of the whole election, the low turnout. And the turnout was low. Gabriel, you were looking a little bit at the turnout numbers just now. Do you want to just give us a sense of the scale of how low the turnout for this election was?
Yeah, so these numbers are going to be a little bit rough, but let's say in 2016 there were about 15 million voters. This time it's looking like 9 million. So that's sort of 6 million people that have dropped off. It's even worse if you look at the sort of proportion of eligible voters who voted. That's looking at just over 20%. So just about 1 in 5 South Africans voted that were eligible to vote. And it's slightly higher if you look at registered voters, but still very low. And part of the reason that this is surprising is, so this is not at all surprising. These kinds of turnout numbers internationally are very normal for local government elections. Usually what happens is when there's a big national election for president, then sort of half the eligible voters will come out and vote. That's more or less what we saw in 2019. But when there's a local government election, sort of half of those people stay away, or 20-30% stay away, and about a quarter or a fifth come in to vote, and that's what we've had. So by international standards, this looks very normal. But by local standards, we've had the opposite journey. We've had our national election turnout numbers decline since 2004, I think was the peak. And the local government election numbers climb. And they climb to the point where 2016 local government elections versus 2019 national elections were almost on a par in terms of the number of people who voted, in terms of the proportion of registered voters who voted, the proportion of eligible voters who voted. And in a way, the story that made sense to me was that South Africa's national politics is rancid. The IRR shows better than anyone else, but as our colleague Terence Corrigan very eloquently pointed out last week, so many other surveys show the same thing, which is that most South Africans are common sense, non-racial, pragmatists who'd like less government, more kind of go-get-em attitude, and more merit. And there's just very little room for that in the political debate because the ruling alliance between the ANC, the EFF, the SACP, and COSATU is really not interested in talking about that. And while opposition parties like the DA and COPE are interested in talking about that, they usually get slammed as racist or irrelevant or whatever when they do so by the major tastemakers. So that seems like a perfect recipe for people disengaging from national politics because they don't like what's happening. 90% of South Africans think we're going in the wrong direction, according to Ipsos, and that's a consistent result. But they don't see the alternative because very few are offering that alternative. And even where they do, they kind of get shouted down. But on the other hand, when it comes to local government, it's just a matter of like, are the potholes being filled in? Is the electricity working? When you turn on the tap, does water come out, or is there a bit of a gap? And that's what's exciting people to go and vote. So this grand narrative of South African politics was, at local government level, we'll see more and more engagement, and there we'll see the change. That narrative has been completely exploded by this election with its extremely low voter turnout. And so then the question is, why is the turnout so low? I think partly it is the factors I've already said. People unhappy with the mainstay parties, don't really see an option for alternative parties. Our CRA polling data had 50% of people not even knowing who John Steenhuisen was, which gives an indication of how poorly the DA is covered in most media. Similar figures for Herman Mashaba. And at the same time, that's not enough to explain it. I think you have to add in factors like, ones that people aren't talking about. Distrust in the IEC. Afrobarometer found that a third of South Africans trusted it, 2/3 did not trust it. I think, and that was before the debacles of 2021, where the IEC said we can't have an election. The ANC, no extensions. Okay, candidate lists will be reopened for the ANC. A lot of stories that I think just might make people feel like, voting already feels kind of weird if you're just 1 in 10 million, but it feels really weird if you're not sure that your vote's going to be counted properly. So I think IEC distrust might have driven the numbers further down. Also, the fact that it was talked about. I think another one is, and I'll finish with this, a kind of lockdown fatigue. So, and this I don't really have good data for, but I've had so many conversations with people who say that their social lives have been completely disrupted over the last year and a half, nearly 2 years. And they find it difficult to re-engage. Like a sweet story is about a nice old Jewish lady who's like 90 years old, and she's had Shabbat every Friday of her life with her family. Then that got cancelled by lockdown. Then she started having it again, and it felt like a duty all of a sudden. Like it had always been something that just came naturally and that she loved. And now she was like, oh my God, I have to make all the food and my children don't even like it. And the grandchildren, they really don't like it. Why am I doing this? I think it takes some effort to participate socially. And voting is an effort of social participation. And people do that because there's the peer pressure and there's the excitement and there's that meeting, there's all the dinners and things that happen in the build-up that make you feel like, I'm going to go do it. And I think people didn't have that. So a lot of people stayed away. But of course, that's not the last factor. I said it would be the last thing I say. Really, the last thing in a way
Gabriel.
is that the ANC spent R500 million in 2016 on electioneering. And this time spent undisclosed, but they said 50
but
million,
not a lot, yeah.
Which is 10%. So you campaign less, you get less numbers.
I quite liked your point there about the sort of disruption to social life. I think there might be something to that. I also think that the attempt to cancel the election and the fact that we didn't have that long, because normally elections have a very particular rhythm where there's sort of this long build up to it, and then it finally happens, and on the day, everyone has had the date drilled into their skull. But one of my friends, who I think occasionally watches this show, so shout out to Jeff if he's watching, but said that he felt this election had just kind of snuck up on him. And I get what he's saying. I think there were people who definitely experienced that. And there's one more thing I think that contributed to low turnout that we cannot rule out. It was on a Monday. People took the long weekend. That is definitely contributing. This is why we have elections on Wednesdays. It's because it's far from the weekend. Marius, what do you make of the low turnout? Do you agree with everything Gabriel said? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, pretty much. And I think 2016 was also quite a unique election, and it had the Zuma factor. So I think that brought a lot of people out to come vote. We can see the ANC is pretty unpopular at the moment. It's probably going to have its worst election results ever. But I do think the 2016 election was we were getting to the point, this kind of, there was real backlash against Zuma and the ANC. And I think that probably brought a lot of people out to vote. Maybe people who were ANC supporters felt like the party was under attack and came out to vote in support. I think at the moment, as you say, it's been quite lethargic. People haven't really come out. I don't buy the Monday election story. Like if the polls are open until 9 o'clock last night, If I know of some people who only left at 11 o'clock last night after voting. So I think if you're a lazy bug and didn't go vote, too bad for you. And I don't think you can complain about the Monday that you were that because you're above.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that it's a justified complaint. I'm just saying that I think some people, if you drove back from, I don't know, the bush or something, or from visiting your relatives in the rural areas on and you arrived back at 6, you probably were a little bit tired, weren't going to bother to go vote. I think we shouldn't actually discount that. I think a lot of people, especially they're not political, they weren't particularly motivated for the election, so they thought, long weekend, whatever.
This is a classical liberal problem, right? Which is, on the one hand, we always want to hold on to agency and individual liberty, so it is your responsibility. It's not a good excuse. But on the other hand, analyzing macro social factors, you see the nudges effect. If you put it on a Monday, it kind of nudges people away from it.
And yesterday was, I think, the last legal day that the election could be held constitutionally, if the 90 days after the end of the council's term and so on. So I think 1st November was the last day by law that the election could be held. So they really snuck it in there. So
yeah, we wouldn't have had all this mess though if they hadn't tried to cancel it.
Yeah, that's what's true. But
yeah.
Just broadly looking at the results now, that's overall, it's pretty much a disaster for the ANC. I'd say at the moment they got under 50% nationally, with about a third of the votes counted. The DA is also getting a hammering in the rural Western Cape. And also in there's in the municipality of Ceresburg, the DA went from being having 55% in 2016, the biggest party there, to having 20% in this election, with the ANC getting 35% and a local community group, Ceresburg Residents Forum or something, getting 27%, nearly 28%. So that is shocking for the DA. But on the other hand, they getting some good results in other parts of the country. It looks like they could actually win Umgeni in KwaZulu-Natal,
right?
Which will be the first municipality they win in KwaZulu-Natal. So, and they're going to get about 70% of the vote in Midvaal. Midvaal's been a DA stronghold for in Gauteng, but they normally get about 55 to 60% of the vote. Now they're looking good for nearly 70%. So that's also pretty good. So I think the DA, they're probably going to do worse than they did in 2016, and they're going to get a bloody nose in the Western Cape. But I think the results in the rest of the country will make up for that, I think. And I don't think this election is not going to be a disaster for the DA, I don't think.
Yeah, it looks like they'll grow from 2019, which is kind of an unfair base in the sense that you're comparing a national election to a municipal election, but is kind of a fair comparison if you're looking at Steenhuisen versus Maimane, which is where a lot of the attention lies.
Yeah, but you could say Maimane was leading in 2016 when they got 27% of the vote. I don't think we can compare national to provincial. You can.
No, you definitely can compare anything.
No, you can. But you can have broad trends.
And
you can't,
and the point about Maimane in 2016 is that he took over a party that was doing really well, and then it went from 27% to 20% under his leadership. And the Steenhuisen argument is, he inherits a party that last got 20% when everyone got a chance to vote, and is now looking at outperforming that. So it's just a question. I think that if the DA did worse than 2019, then that would be the comparison, and it would be a reason to consider withdrawing Steenhuisen as leader and installing someone new. If they do better than that, then I think that his position will be relatively secure. We also, by the way, discussed the ANC leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, his popularity and his stability relative to this election. It's worth reminding viewers that in the latest polls, Cyril Ramaphosa's approval rating was about twice as much as the ANC's approval. So about 60% versus 35, slightly less than twice as much. That might make you think if the ANC falls below 50%, which it's currently looking like it'll do, whether that will raise questions about his leadership of the party. I think not, but precisely because he's in the opposite position to Steenhuisen, where he is much more popular than the ANC and therefore much harder to remove.
As Fikile Mbalula, I think, said last time in 2019, the only reason we got more than 50% was Cyril. And I think that's very possibly true this time, even more so. And in fact, they won't get over 50%. It's too early to say, but I think that all likelihood they're going to have a very bad election.
In terms of reading the broader results, a quick point is that I think more than half of the votes are accounted for. If you look at the sort of headline dashboard, you've got nearly 3 million for the ANC, 1.5 million for the DA, 600,000 for other, but that's only adding up to 20%. And on the IEC's dashboard, they generally only add up to 80%. So 20% of the votes have been counted, but haven't been slotted into one of those other categories because of the way that their collation works. So in any event, that means that you're looking at you've got at least 5 million votes that are accounted for. And if the IEC's headline figures from last night are anything to go by, that means we're at over 50% of the vote accounted for. Now, that's not to say that we should be fully confident that things aren't going to change as the rest of the votes are counted. If you look at the Gauteng and KZN results, there you have 3 million votes between those two provinces outstanding. So that's a huge amount that hasn't yet been counted there. And I think that you will see a lot of those districts leaning ANC, just sort of reading off of what the historical patterns were. So currently the ANC sitting on 46.6. It'd be interesting if they stayed around there. But I think that there's good reason to suppose that they will climb as the day progresses.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit difficult, at least for a while, to draw a very clear conclusion about how the opposition parties have done, except to say that it kind of looks like Action SA has done all right. They didn't, I think, perhaps, there were Action SA candidates in some of the suburban wards who believed they were going to beat the DA there. Action SA put out this polling before the election saying that they were the biggest party in Joburg. That's almost certainly not going to be true. But for a first-time party, they've done better than any of the other first-time parties. Even the EFF in 2011, they're kind of doing a similar-ish level there. Except, interestingly, while most of their support seems to have come from the DA, they have also picked up some support from the ANC, which is definitely shifting the dynamics in Joburg. But Joburg is firstly not very heavily in yet. And also, Action SA actually didn't stand in a lot of places. Only 6 municipalities they stood. But so they really focused in those areas.
The Action SA did also take a voting district of the ANC in Soweto. So I think it's looking possible that they're taking as much support away from the ANC as from the DA. So
is that coming from Darby Skolts?
Yeah, that's what I saw. I haven't been able to find it. Yeah, so, and I mean, they're sitting on 17% right now in Joburg, which is pretty good for a first-time party. They're not doing as well in the other places around in Tshwane and Ekurhuleni. In Ekurhuleni, they're about 5%, I think, or 6%. So they could be a kingmaker. Look, I think it's not impossible that we're going to have Herman Mashaba be the mayor of Joburg after when all the dust is settled. I think that could be a possibility, actually.
Yeah. As I said, it's unusual for a kingmaker to crown himself, but Napoleon did it.
Exactly.
So maybe Mashaba will too.
Oh, he didn't crown himself king; he crowned himself emperor. And indeed. I think that Mashaba might well prefer to crown himself emperor rather than mayor.
If I can just give a small Action SA anecdote. So my voting ward, 67, is sort of split between Yeovil, very low income, high density area, and Upper Houghton, which is very high income, low density. And the Yeovil results are not in at all, but the Houghton results are in, Upper Houghton. And in 2016, that went sort of something like 65% DA, 20% ANC, 10% EFF. So the DA had a strong win there. Right now, the DA this time is just on 50%, and 20% has gone to Action SA, and about 15% to the ANC. So the Action SA is 20%, is like 15% from the DA and 5% from the ANC, also maybe a little bit from the EFF.
You know what's very interesting is one of the best ANC performances in all the suburbs. I've heard this from a former DA colleague. Was actually in Westcliff and Forest Town. which is quite interesting.
Yes. The other sweet thing, I mean, so I do think the Action SA gets like a kind of Gucci vote. But they also have done well where they've picked up, where they've won voting districts in Johannesburg so far. One is centered around Jewel City, sort of Doornfontein, just around Ellis Park area. And I think it does include Jewel City, which is probably the best achievement of Mashaba's era. He managed to get some old rubbish buildings condemned and get a sort of public-private partnership in there to establish one of the nicest sort of good-looking, safe areas in high-density, low-income Joburg CBD that you can find. And the other is sort of more Western CBD, where you have not that many residences, mainly commercial spaces, but where people live in those commercial spaces. And there, you see an overlap with the Jewel City story, which so partly it's like quite nice, people who believe this guy's good for business, he's not into the cater deployment thing of the ANC, but also those are two of the source points of the xenophobic attacks that we saw in 2019. And, small business operators who don't like competing with foreigners who can't vote might also feel a special affinity to Action SA. Certainly the votes show that that those two areas have gone Action SA's way.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's a thing we do have to point out because it might be obvious to us, but because we talk about this stuff all the time, but there's this thing called differential turnout. And I'm sure some of our listeners have heard about this before, but that's basically when turnout is low, it's not low everywhere at the same, it's not as low everywhere. So in this election, one of the reasons that the opposition is looking to do well and the ANC is looking to do badly is because areas where there are ANC voters didn't turn out and areas where there are opposition voters did turn out. So that's normally cast as a sort of suburban township divide, but I think it was probably also true in the townships that you had people who wanted to vote for the opposition coming out. So I think that also speaks to the fact that the ANC is in trouble, is that it just wasn't able to convince people who might have voted for it to come out and vote. They were just not, maybe because it was the election budget, but people were just not enthusiastic. I mean, we saw the entire time that Ramaphosa was campaigning in Soweto, people were booing him or demanding answers about electricity. So I'm not terribly surprised that ANC strongholds failed to turn out voters, particularly in places like Soweto.
And
so,
I think,
yeah, Marius?
For ANC voters who are kind of getting are looking for a new party, I think it's a big deal. I mean, not just for ANC people, anybody who has been a strong supporter for a party for a while. I think it's quite a big deal to change your vote in the next election. So I think what happens to a lot of people is who don't want to vote ANC anymore, but they just can't bring themselves to vote for another party, whether it's DA, EFF, Action SA, whoever it is. So they rather sit up an election or two before they can bring themselves to vote against the ANC. And I think that's perhaps what we're seeing now. We're seeing this really low turnout in ANC strongholds and much higher. I mean, I think from what I've been seeing, the analysis saying about 60 to 70% turnout in suburbs, which generally vote DA, about 50%, even a bit lower in townships, which generally vote ANCs. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. And I think there's just quite a bit of apathy towards the ANC, and it doesn't bode well for the party going forward. But that said, they always do get better turnout in national elections. So 2024, they could maybe still scrape in above 50%. But I mean, time will tell, I think.
Yeah,
if I can pick up on that point, I think Marius makes the most important point from this election. Whoever wins and whatever the coalition sort of squabbles on, I would like to talk about that. I see someone asked about Durban. I'd like to hear your guys' view. I don't know. But part of the reason that election turnout results are usually represented as a portion of registered voters rather than a proportion of eligible voters is that there are very few people like me. I didn't vote in a municipal election before. I voted this time. Statistically, it's easier to sit back and say, okay, look, if people haven't voted, they're unlikely to turn out to vote. They've kind of chosen their culture of not voting. But people who have voted before, people who voted in 2019, people who voted in 2016 and aren't voting this time, but are very much still alive and kicking, they can be brought back to the vote. And if the cycle is you voted for ANC all your life, and then you need a palate cleanser before you can vote for anyone else, that means going into 2024, opposition parties are looking at a bigger block of open targets than we've ever seen. And I think that this, more than anything, will give the ANC very, very serious worries.
I think that really is the one of the really big points here, is that next election, the ANC is fighting for its survival as a national government.
If it drops below 50 here, and with these turnout numbers, it's a hard hill to climb.
Yeah, it's gonna have to fight really hard. So who knows? We may be in for great political changes in the next few years. So one of the questions, the thing we haven't talked about that much, unless I zoned out for a second and missed someone say something about it, is the EFF. And now it's too early to say exactly, I think, based on the results we've seen so far, how well they've done. But my sense, from what I've heard from former DA colleagues, from seeing little bits and pieces here and there, is that they did about the same as they did last time, which is maybe a little bit better in some places. But overall, not a fantastic result for them. What do you guys make of it so far? Am I right in that, or could that change?
Yeah, I agree. They seem to be, at the moment, they're sitting around about 9-10% of the national votes. And if there was really this big EFF breakthrough, I think we'd see them sitting on 15%, maybe even higher. And in Gauteng, they're only sitting on about 12%. And Gauteng is really one of their strongholds. Even if you look at Limpopo, where not too many of the votes have been counted, only 20%, but they're only on 13%. And Limpopo is a place where, out of all the provinces in South Africa, that's EFF's strongest province. So if we really were seeing this major EFF breakthrough, we'd be seeing them at 20 to 30%, maybe in Limpopo. We're not seeing that. So I think this is also, the EFF will do better than it did in 2016. But I think overall for them, this is going to be a bit of a disappointing election, actually, I think.
Mm-hmm. What do you make, Gabriel?
Same.
Yeah, look, my sense is, as it turns out, encouraging people to trash shops and telling people to have huge numbers of children that they can't support, and just generally, telling the police to scorp and dona anyone who violates the lockdown. I don't think it worked out for them. And it proves that at the end of the day, our central thesis, maybe I'll be eating humble pie in a few hours from now, but I think it suggests that our central thesis, that actually most South Africans are moderate and don't want this extreme nonsense, is correct. And the EFF, I wouldn't be surprised if, and this is entirely anecdotal and not based on data, so take this with a grain of salt, that there were people who might have voted for the EFF this time, seeing it as the strong horse of opposition party politics. I think that definitely happened last time. But instead, they maybe went for Action SA this time. And that would definitely, I think, explain to me some of the reasons why the Action SA has done quite well in places like Soweto.
Yeah,
anyway,
if I can jump from there to another small party, the FF, also FF Plus.
Yes.
They seem
well
to be
Victoria so far.
They seem to be doing surprisingly well in a lot of places. And got an interesting theory from one of our colleagues, Sihle Ngobesi, that their hard stance on Cape independence might be playing into that. So in the build-up to this election, I saw the DA campaign in ways that seemed to appeal to Afrikaans voters in a way that, at a level that I hadn't seen before. John Steenhuisen was there at the Voortrekker Monument wearing his veldskoene with blowvletters, and they sort of celebrated the UNISA ruling, which is a good ruling by the Constitutional Court, that Afrikaans needs to be one of the official languages used there for instruction. So while the DA was doing that, the Vryheidsfront Plus was not doing much like that. And so it was hard to see what their value-add proposition was. But, of course, they are the only mainstream party that has already gone for Cape independence and said this is something that we really want. So for that proportion of the electorate that thinks this is a great idea, I think they have one credible option. The Cape Independence Movement Party, maybe too new, Johnny come lately, hard to know if you can trust those guys, for the average voter who's not particularly into this thing, whereas the Vryheidsfront Plus seems like they're pushing a hardline agenda there, which might be in part explaining those results.
I think the Freedom Front Plus gain in Cape Town is just part of their broader gain overall compared to DA. They're on sitting 1.7% now. They got about 0.4, 0.5% last election. And Cape Independence itself got about 0.5. So, if we look at parties that are explicitly pro-Cape Independence, they got about 2% of votes in the Cape Metro. So it's hardly this great groundswell for Cape Independence.
No, I'm not saying it's a great groundswell, but I don't think that only people in Cape Town are interested in that agenda.
Well, I must call it to a close, so gentlemen. We will be having a live stream tonight at 7:00 with us, as in the people you see on the screen or hear on the podcast today. So that'll be analyzing more results that have come in. We may also have another colleague or two on the podcast on that show tonight. So join us at 7 tonight for that. And we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please support the Institute of Race Relations and keep tuned. We will be obviously following the election results as they come in over the next couple of hours. Anyway, we hope that you have a most excellent, fantastic, and wonderful day, everyone. And we shall see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers.